Tool, we're going to start the May board meeting. The board meeting of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and its component units is now called to order due to the ongoing public health crisis posed by COVID-19 and in light of the recommendations from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention to avoid gatherings of more than 10 people. Today's meeting is virtual via teleconference with audio being live streamed from the Port Authority's website. Earlier today, the Committee on Finance met in executive session, both independently and jointly with the Audit Committee. Their reports will be filed with the official minutes of today's board meeting. The Commissioners also met in executive session earlier today to discuss matters involving ongoing negotiations or reviews of contracts or proposals, matters related to lease of real property wherein disclosure would affect the value thereof or the public interest, matters related to personnel and personnel proceedings, and matters involving public safety and law enforcement. The first order of business, I'd like to turn to our executive director, Rick, if he will give his monthly report and obviously detail the issues dealing with coronavirus and how we are dealing with our operations and obviously the large issue about securing federal funding. Rick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioners. As I have reported each board meeting since the onset of the coronavirus crisis, Port Authority employees have continued to keep all facilities open and operating. The importance of the continued safe operation of our facilities will only increase as the states of New York and New Jersey begin carefully and thoughtfully the process of a phased and measured reopening. But I must begin by reiterating my thanks to agency employees who have been so critical to the flawless operation of the agency's facilities throughout this crisis. Their dedication and commitment has been extraordinary. I also want to thank the leadership of the 23 unions that represent the majority of our employees, both at the Port Authority and its path, for their continued support and leadership as the agency navigates this crisis. We continue our facilities operating in the way they have without this commitment and dedication of our employees. To provide an update in terms of our operating volume, these have plunged in ways that we would never and no one would ever have anticipated. To date, operating volumes across Port Authority facilities continue to be down at unprecedented low levels due to COVID-19. Airport passenger traffic is down 95%. Path ridership is down 95%. Bridge and tunnel traffic has been down as much as 60%, and last week was down 43%. The seaport has fared better, with March volumes down by 4%, and April cargo volumes forecast to be down approximately 8 to 10%, although we do not have final figures yet. Supply lines, as evidenced by these seaport figures, have remained functioning, obviously with medical and PPE shipments being handled with the highest priority. These declines are projected to blow a $3 billion hole in our revenue lines over the next 24 months. And those operating volumes and the collapse of those revenue lines is what has led us to seek federal support to fill that hole. On Wednesday, May 13th, the Port Authority, with the support of civic, business, and labor leaders from across the region, requested $3 billion in direct federal assistance to offset the agency's estimated revenue losses as a result over the next 24 months as a result of the coronavirus crisis. And direct financial assistance is required to fill this enormous hole. That revenue decline in turn threatens in dire terms the agency's capital plan, and direct federal financial assistance is required to ensure the continuation of critically important infrastructure projects which equate to tens of thousands of good local jobs and more than $20 billion in public and private spending, which we incentivize over 5
We ask everyone to mute their phones, please.
Okay, I'm going to continue. And with respect to this construction, I do want to emphasize that our capital projects will drive more than $10 billion in private spending through the public-private partnerships that we are engaged with. I'll discuss our request to the federal government more in a moment. Let me turn to the Port Authority's workforce and the impacts of COVID-19. I believe that the Port Authority has managed under very trying circumstances in this crisis to handle the impact of the coronavirus outbreak as well as any large organization could. With respect to the impact of coronavirus on Port Authority employees, since the start of the crisis until this week, a total of 235 Port Authority employees have reported testing positive for COVID-19. Of the 235, 194 have fully recovered and returned to work. As of today, 39 are still recovering and are on medical leave. An extraordinarily low 94 employees are currently self-quarantining, down from a high of more than 700, based on close contact with fellow employees who either tasted positive or exhibited symptoms and are awaiting test results. You should be able to see on your screens a bar graph which shows the day-by-day quarantine levels at the Port Authority, and I'm pleased to report that literally today, the report is that 94, only back down into the double digits, 94 of our employees remain in quarantine. Virtually all employees who have tested positive have experienced, thank goodness, mild to moderate symptoms and are recovering. Our thoughts and prayers continue to be with families, the families of the 2 Port Authority employees who have died from the virus, one an administrative employee who is working remotely, and one an employee in the PATH maintenance department. Our thoughts, condolences, and prayers are with these families and also with the 1 Port Authority employee who is in the hospital. All of these impacts are far and away at the low end of what large organizations have experienced in this terrible crisis. These results are a tribute to the great commitment and great discipline demonstrated across the board at all levels of the agency to quickly implement and constantly improve protective measures for our employees while they continue their vital work to keep our facilities open and operating. Our latest update on employee safety measures was our announcement earlier this week of an expanded testing program that the agency has now made available to essential employees. From the start of the coronavirus crisis, the Port Authority has worked to ensure that employees have had access to diagnostic testing through United Healthcare, including the waiver of all employee fees for testing and for treatment related to COVID-19. Starting at the beginning of this week, essential Port Authority employees, those who have been required and are required by their duties to report in person to their place of work, will now have the ability to schedule free on-demand COVID-19 diagnostic testing at multiple additional convenient locations in New York and in New Jersey. As testing availability continues to improve throughout the region, the Port Authority will seek to continue to expand the availability of testing for Port Authority and PATH employees. With respect to how our facilities are operating, we have required masks for all individuals indoors in all Port Authority facilities. Cleaning and disinfecting procedures continue at dramatically intensified levels at all Port Authority facilities in both the public areas and employee workspace. Social distancing requirements are also fully in place. Now, due to COVID-19 related declines in passenger activity, the Port Authority has adjusted its operating footprints and protocols, both in the interest of safety and in the interest of reducing costs during this period of reduced numbers of travelers. At our airports, since April 28th, access to passenger terminals at JFK, Newark, Liberty, and LaGuardia have been restricted to ticketed passengers, airport employees, and others who have business at the airport. This policy supports reductions to the operating footprints at our airports, which have been in place since the end of March. Large numbers of gates have been closed. Some terminals have been consolidated. A variety of concourses have also been consolidated. Retail concessions are closed. Most food and beverage concessions are closed, except for assuring the presence of grab-and-go food and beverage that assures that such services are available to all passengers who continue to use the airport. At the Midtown Bus Terminal, multiple areas of the building have been closed, including the 9th Avenue entrance. All bus operations in the South Wing lower level continue to be relocated to the North Wing, and portions of service have been suspended on the South Wing's 4th floor, and the related passenger areas temporarily closed. At PATH, given its 95% drop in ridership, PATH has introduced a reduced schedule, but one that still is committed to two overriding objectives. First, to provide reliable service for essential employees as they go to and from their jobs. And second, to ensure adequate capacity for social distancing in train cars. PATH staff continuously monitor passenger volumes and take immediate action, including, if necessary, the insertion of additional train service into the schedule in order to achieve these objectives. Since May 6th, PATH's 9th and 23rd Street stations have been closed overnight between midnight and 5 a.m., and these overnight station closures enable PATH to focus resources efficiently throughout the system. At our bridges and tunnels, the physical exchange of cash between motorists and toll collectors has been suspended, moving to cashless tolling at each of our Hudson River crossings. The Staten Island to New Jersey bridges, of course, completed their transition to cashless tolling in 2019. At the Oculus World Trade Center Transit Hub, entrances and exits have been consolidated in a manner to achieve a more efficient operation. Turning to recovery planning, the Port Authority is planning intensely for the phased resumption of its operations in line with guidance from the federal government and the states of New York and New Jersey. As state emergency orders are gradually lifted, the Port Authority's transportation facilities will obviously experience increasing activity levels, and we will be prepared. But it is also obviously impossible to revert purely to pre-COVID operating procedures. In this context, the Port Authority has established 8 resumption of service working groups to develop safe and effective operating protocols. The agency has established a working group for each of its operating departments: aviation, PATH, port, tunnels, bridges, and terminals, and the World Trade Center. These working groups are developing safety protocols and revised operating protocols on a facility-by-facility basis to assure that the Port Authority is prepared as operations resume to be able to assure both customers and employees that all necessary steps are being taken to assure safe daily operation. The agency has also established 3 cross-cutting working groups focused on 1, agency-wide health and safety practices, 2, police and security practices, and 3, new technology and global best practices. We intend to be sure that our safety practices are top of the class. These groups are collectively focused on identifying all necessary steps to enable safe and productive operating conditions and workforce conditions as we proceed through the recovery. Now let me turn to our request to the Congress. There's a very important development yesterday afternoon which I want to focus upon, but let me put it in context first. The Port Authority, as the board knows, is self-funding in normal conditions. We do not receive recurring federal funds. We do not receive funding from either New York or New Jersey. That is the basis on which the Port Authority was set up. But these are not normal times, obviously. The Port Authority has experienced a $3 billion drop in the revenue we project over the next 24 months, tied to our unprecedented collapse in volume. Our revenues normally exceed our operating expenses, but every dime then goes to support our capital plan. With the drop in volumes and drop in revenues, the capital plan is profoundly threatened. Therefore, we really face no choice but to go to DC and ask for federal funding to fill in the gap and the drop in our revenue. What we have done, 10 days ago, the chair and I wrote to the New York and New Jersey congressional delegations outlining the drop in volume, the drop in revenues, and the need for a $3 billion funding. Secondly, a letter from a broad array of civic, labor, and business leaders wrote to the two delegations in support of our request. The context in the Congress is that the Congress is currently considering aid to state and local government. But that aid is focused on states, counties, and municipalities. The Port Authority is a local government agency. However, due to the fact that we normally do not participate in standard federal funding programs, the Port Authority is not in the traditional language that Congress uses to distribute federal funds to state and local government. In normal times, it leaves us out as a multi-state agency, and in normal times, that is fine. The Port Authority, as I've said, is self-funding. But at this extraordinary moment, our ask to the Congress is that multi-state agencies such as the Port Authority become eligible for federal funding, and at this time that the Congress provide to the Port Authority a $3 billion infusion in order for us to proceed with our capital project. What is at stake if we are unable to do so is twofold. First, we will not be able to contribute vigorously to the economic recovery that this region needs so desperately. And second, it will compromise our ability to update our facilities, to transform our facilities, to provide the 21st century transportation facilities that this region deserves, and the 21st century transportation facilities that will attract travelers back to this region, again, a very high priority need. What I'm pleased to announce is that yesterday, 23 members of the New York and New Jersey delegations wrote a letter to the leaders of the Congress, to Speaker Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy in the House, to Mitch McConnell, and to Charles Schumer in the Senate. And Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I would like to read that letter to you. Dear Speaker Pelosi, Leader McCarthy, Leader McConnell, and Leader Schumer, as you continue to craft additional relief packages in response to the economic impact of coronavirus, we request that you provide additional relief to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. As you know, the New York metropolitan region has become the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite an unprecedented decline in revenue, the Port Authority has continued operating to get urgently needed goods and supplies into the region and essential workers safely to where they need to be to address those most impacted by the crisis. Current estimates indicate that the Port Authority will face a revenue reduction of at least $3 billion over the next 2 years. We write to express our strong support for the Port Authority's request for $3 billion in federal assistance and request that future stimulus packages are crafted to ensure that critical, congressionally created multi-state agencies like the Port Authority are not unintentionally excluded. The Port Authority was created by New York and New Jersey 99 years ago, pursuant to statutory authorization from Congress, acting under the Compact Clause of the Constitution. The Port Authority was envisioned as a financially freestanding and independent entity, and to this day, it still functions that way. The Port Authority has no power to tax and does not rely on funding from New York or New Jersey. It relies on customer user fees and contractually required payments from business partners, both of which have dramatically declined during the pandemic. While we understand that resources are needed across the board, a healthy, fully functional Port Authority is critical to our region's recovery from this crisis. Assistance will ensure that the Port Authority can continue operating throughout this crisis and serve more than 20 million people who live and work in the region as our nation recovers from the pandemic. The Port Authority also employs 8,000 workers directly, and its facilities support 1 million regional jobs. These jobs are essential to the economic recovery of our region. Furthermore, if a forthcoming stimulus package does not include substantial financial assistance, the Port Authority may be forced to make substantial cuts to its capital. As formulated, the capital plan would drive $20 billion of capital to critical infrastructure projects during the next 5 years alone, generate more than 100,000 local jobs, and would rely on a set of public-private partnerships and on commitments of more than $10 billion in private capital. The Port Authority will not be able to preserve its capital plan without sufficient and large-scale financial assistance. Construction spending will be critically important to our region's economic recovery, and the Port Authority's extensive leveraging of private capital means that every dollar of federal assistance provided to the agency will support several times that amount in direct spending on regional construction projects. We appreciate that the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, CARES Act, provided $450 million in aid to Port Authority Airport. Unfortunately, the Port Authority does not receive rail transit assistance grants, and the CARES Act does not cover unprecedented revenue losses at the Port Authority's toll facilities and seaport. This said, multi-state agencies were included in the CARES Act bond purchasing program, and the Federal Reserve's municipal liquidity facility, established by the CARES Act, specifically encompasses multi-state compact clause entities with strong credit ratings, such as the Port Authority. We urge you to adopt the eligibility criteria in these recent congressional and executive branch actions to aid multi-state agencies by ensuring they are eligible for direct federal funding in future COVID-19 relief packages and to provide the Port Authority with $3 billion in federal aid. We thank you for your attention to this matter and for your work on behalf of the nation during this crisis. That letter is signed by Jerry Nadler, Alvio Cirrus, Donald Payne, Bill Pascrell, Andy Kim, Frank Ballone, Grace Meng, Kathleen Rice, Hakeem Jeffries, Bonnie Watson Coleman, Tom Malinowski, Sean Patrick Maloney, Lee Zeldin, Thomas Swozy, Antonio Delgado, Brian Higgins, Adriano Espaillat, Elliot Engel, Carolyn Maloney, Peter King, Nydia Velasquez, Gregory Meek, Yvette Clark, Donald Norcross, Josh Gottheimer, John Katko, and Nikki Sherrill. We are grateful to both delegations for the support that they have conveyed. We look forward to working with them. We look forward to working with the entire Congress on this federal aid request. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Rick, for that extraordinary report during these extraordinary times. As you stated in your comments, Rick, the Port Authority was founded 99 years ago. 11 months from now, we will be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Port Authority that was passed as a compact by the U.S. Congress in 1921. It was in that time, if you look back in the records, in 1921, there was a recognition that this region was desperately in need of a coordination of transportation, shipping, bridges, and roads. Coming off of the World War I effort, there was a recognition by our leaders that there was a backup of sorts because we couldn't get our troops and supplies in the eastern seaport because of the lack of coordinated transportation hubs and roadways and structures. Congress at that time saw the need to intervene and create this bi-state agency, an extraordinary effort. And given the circumstances that have now transpired 99 years later, we are asking Congress to intervene during this very extraordinary time. And I'll tell you, Rick, it has been heartening to see the outreach and support by the congressional delegations, both in New York and New Jersey. You and I and senior staff have engaged in long, intimate conversations, both with staff levels and with the principals in those offices. And it has been remarkable how willing that all of those congressmen and women have offered their support and saying they're going to hopefully move this forward. We need them, and we need Congress to act like it acted in 1921. Let's talk about the issue of the track record of the Port Authority during this crisis, Rick. The slide that was put up there about the 94 quarantines, it's been the lowest ever since this pandemic, and it is a great tribute to you, Rick, and your steering committee and your senior staff that you immediately recognized what had to be done to make very significant, decisive actions day one to first and foremost safeguard the health and welfare of all of the Port Authority employees and their families. I think the record down the road will reflect that quick thinking, deep thinking, rational thinking, forward thinking probably saved many, many lives, Rick. And it's a great tribute and credit to you. Above and beyond that, you took very, very decisive actions to make sure that this Port Authority agency, which literally connects New York and New Jersey, the Eastern Seaboard, and provides goods, materials, transport, medical supplies, food to many, many outposts in the United States, that has been operational, and there has been no break in service and no break in the supply chain. And that has been a tribute to the Port Authority and to you. And to the employees that have been out there, Rick, as you and I have said in our daily and weekly broadcasts, it could not be done without the hardworking effort of each and every Port Authority employee. Totally committed to the purpose, totally committed to what this agency stands for, and totally consistent with what this agency has delivered in the last 99 years, Rick. And we will continue to do that. And to the commissioners, I want to thank all of them, along with the senior staff, for being so cooperative, lending in where we've asked them for advice and their talents. It has been, there's no handbook for this, dealing with this pandemic. And everyone has kind of worked together, rolled up their sleeves, and adopted the Port Authority attitude and mentality of just getting it done. And you have seen, we have unleashed, as I've said before, the raw potential of the Port Authority, and it is here. As we look at these numbers, Rick, I will tell you, even though there's no crystal ball, it appears that we are closer to the end than the beginning. There is a long road to go. There are many challenges in front of us, and we need to preserve the current operations and obviously preserve the capital program as much as humanly possible. But we will not do it at the expense of taking any shortcuts, endangering the welfare of the public, or certainly endangering any of the people that work for this wonderful agency. As we move forward, Rick, look forward to continuing our partnership, which has been unique for the last 3 years. And there, as we said day one, Rick, there will not be a moment of separation between you and I and senior staff, and there hasn't been. And I think because of that, we're a better agency because of it. At this point, I'd like to ask, first of all, any commissioners want to add or any questions to Rick on his director's report? Okay, hearing none, then we're going to ask Diane Eller, our Director of Tunnels, Bridges, and Terminals, to recognize several Lincoln Tunnel Operation employees and Port Authority police officers for two life-saving events that recently occurred at the Lincoln Tunnel. These are just two examples of many examples of how the Port Authority staff continue to do their jobs without complaint, day in and day out. And Diane, we ask you to give us some examples of what occurred here.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners, and Executive Director Cotton for the opportunity to recognize Lincoln Tunnel Operations staff and Port Authority Police Department for their life-saving responses on April 11th and April 26, 2020. During the month of April, Lincoln Tunnel Operations staff and the Port Authority Police Command responded to two separate life and death emergencies, and in each instance, through their combined efforts, saved the lives of two people. On Saturday, April 11th, at approximately 6:30 a.m., Patron Services Unit Field Supervisor Kevin Sofield received a report of a 61-year-old male construction worker having a seizure on the roof of the Lincoln Tunnel Administration Building. Unit Field Supervisor Sofield immediately requested Lincoln Tunnel Emergency Response Vehicle and an ambulance to the scene. General Patient Supervisor Services Tour Field Supervisor Eric Vigenet quickly dispatched the emergency response vehicle and notified PAPT Lieutenant Talamini, Weehawken EMS, and Jersey City ALS of the incident. Unit Field Supervisor Sofield responded to the roof and found the patient unconscious with no pulse. Police Officer Crystal Armenti arrived on the scene and also detected no pulse, requested an automated external defibrillator or an AED, moved the patient into position for CPR, and prepped him for defibrillation. Tour Field Supervisor Dijonay immediately retrieved an AED and sent it to the scene. Within moments, Lieutenant Talamini, Officer John Epperline, a senior tunnel and bridge agent, Keith O'Halloran, and tunnel and bridge agent David Priority responded to the scene. Senior TBA O'Halloran and TBA Priority quickly began CPR and initiated assisted ventilation with the assistance of Officer Epperline. Lieutenant Talamini used the AED on the patient, and after a second application of the AED, the patient regained his pulse and was breathing. The ambulance arrived shortly thereafter, and the patient was transported to a local hospital. We received word from the construction worker's employer 2 days later, and he was in stable condition. The quick and decisive action of the Lincoln Tunnel staff, the police command, proved life-saving and made all of the difference in the world. Separately, on Sunday, April 26th, a team of Lincoln Tunnel operations staff and police command again responded to a life and death emergency involving an unconscious word from the construction worker's employer 2 days later, and he was in stable condition. Just before 11 a.m., police officer Crystal Armenti advised Lincoln Tunnel desk of a possible disabled vehicle with a flat tire located at the end of Kennedy Boulevard on-ramp on eastbound 495. Tour Field Supervisor Dejanay immediately retrieved the AED and sent it AED to the scene. Within moments, Lieutenant, just want to make sure. Within a minute, I lost my place. Within a minute, Officer Armenti looped around Kennedy Interchange to respond to the site, reported to the Lincoln Tunnel desk that the driver, a 52-year-old male, was unconscious and unresponsive. Police Officer Armenti requested an ambulance and broke the window to gain access to the driver. Immediately, the Lincoln Tunnel desk dispatched the emergency response vehicle and notified Police Officer Lieutenant Victor Palamini and Weehawken EMS of the incident. By 11 a.m., Lieutenant Talamini, Police Officer Dana Fuller, and the emergency response vehicle carrying Senior TBA Keith O'Halloran and TBA David Reverdy arrived on the scene. Immediately, Police Officer Armenti and Senior TBA O'Halloran began performing CPR compressions, while Police Officer Fuller and TBA Priority performed ventilation using a bag mask and a defibrillator. A pulse was successfully restored. An ambulance arrived shortly thereafter, and the patient was transported to a local hospital. The Port Authority received word later in the afternoon that the driver was awake and talking. During both incidents, the individuals received life-saving first aid through the quick and decisive actions of the Lincoln Tunnel operations of police personnel, who demonstrated true teamwork at every step of the heat response. Twice in April, this core team of Lincoln Tunnel Guardian Angels saved a life. For that, I would like to recognize the following individuals, 4 of whom responded to both incidents. Police Officer Crystal Armenti, who was involved in both responses, and Tunnel and Bridge Agent Dave Bry. Dave also responded in both incidents. Tour manager Eric, General Patient Service Supervisor Eric Dejanay, and Police Officer John Epperlein. Police Officer Dana Fuller, and Senior TBA Agent Keith O'Halloran. Keith also provided response in both incidents. Patient Service Supervisor Kevin Sofield. Kevin provided response in both incidents. Police Lieutenant Victor Talamini. Victor provided response in both incidents. Thanks again for letting me recognize these individuals.
Thank you very much, Diane, and to the officers, Dana, John, Victor, Crystal, and to the employees, David, Kevin, Eric, and Keith. On behalf of the executive director and all the commissioners, a special thank you and shout out to wonderful job, exceptional work. Very, very proud of you. In lieu of our speakers program in this virtual teleconference, written statements have been shared with the board earlier today and will be filed with the transcripts of today's board meeting and posted on the Port Authority's website after the meeting. I'll point out that none of the comments relate to the items before the board for approval. We'll now proceed with the one item on today's board list. I ask Commissioner Bagger, Chair of the Committee on Finance, to provide his report. Commissioner Bagger?
November 21st, 2002 resolution concerning signature of checks, wire transfers, and depository service agreements. Under the existing resolution, only the controller and deputy controller have signatory authority for payroll checks. This amendment would provide some additional flexibility and add the chief financial officer and the treasurer among those who are authorized to do so. Prior to making a motion on this item, I'd ask the corporate secretary to note any commissioner recusals on this matter.
There are no recusals.
Do any commissioners have?
Try reading it online.
Because this is a right now
Yeah.
issue. And if we don't deal with it right now, same thing that's happened in the past will
Well,
continue to
it
happen.
names this.
Yeah, can we just mute the rest of the rest of the phones, please?
Yeah, I put it on the computer to try to read it as opposed to off the paper. I
Hey,
should've
Diane,
just-
your mic is on, Diane. Hey, Rich, you can
So
just
thank you.
keep it to
I was
vote.
gonna say, yeah, any questions or comments from the board on this item? If not, is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a se-
Commissioner
Is there a
Pacino
second?
moves approval.
Beautiful. And I think I heard a second also.
Yes.
So I'd ask the
Second.
corporate secretary to call the roll, please.
Chairman O'Toole,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Linford,
Yes.
Commissioner Bagger,
Yes.
Commissioner Ede,
Yes.
Commissioner Horwitz,
Yes.
Commissioner LaBarbera,
Yes.
Commissioner McCabe,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner Pacino,
Ray?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Rosado,
Yes.
Okay, so as the votes are in order, the item is approved, and I'll turn it back to Chairman O'Toole.
Thank you very much. That's the only vote that we have. Appreciate that, Commissioner Bagger. The meeting is now adjourned, and we'll proceed on a separate line for press. Thank you all. See you next month.
Thank you all.
Right,
Be
thank
safe
you.
out there. Thank you.
Thank you.